Nelson de Galeno, who is going to present the legal security of investments in legal Amazon. I'd like to Dr. Nelson. First, I'd like to congratulate for this hub. We know that it's very hard to be from Brazil leading everything here. So congratulations on the organizers. I'd like to talk about the legislation on environment. And we understand that in the Legal Amazon Consortium, we needed to create a group of prosecutors that could give security to the decisions of the governors. We understand that we could use the example of the governors complex legislation. We need to advance with the issues of the environment. We have a loss of resources, and we needed to stop that. And that should become a reality. So we create a group with all the prosecutors of the different offices, so that with the Secretariat of Environment and different secretaries, with the Planning Secretary as well, we could work together. And we've been working closely to make that a reality. Into the legal language, and now the decision makers are much more confident to make decisions. And now the states from the Amazon are able to work together, and we were able to advance in the different issues of environment. And this is the understanding of all the prosecutors' offices in the region of the Amazon. There's not a single way to work with the environment. The rules are very complex, and sometimes we need to laws. We are a subnational entity as a state, but we must work together to transform the different resources. So I'm going to stop now, and we're going to have this presentation, and we are very happy to be part of this kind of events, because the importance of the environment and its link to legislation should bring security to everyone involved. There are many complexities concerning the environment. With our aid, the different states with the different governors are able to make decisions in this reality that is advancing with the states. With the floor now, Dr. Wellington Bringel de Almeida. Good morning, everyone. My name is Wellington Bringel de Almeida. I work as a prosecutor of environment of the state of Amapá. I am part of the legal Amazon workforce. And Mr. Dr. Rodrigo das Neves was going to present with me, but due to another commitment, he asked me to start. And we also have another investors to talk about the issue of the legal Amazon. And can you hear me? And they told me it's not enough to bring the best project to investors if we don't have the legal permits. They know it's a complex issue and that finally they are going to invest the money. And I understood what he meant. When we're talking about climate, we have the legal safety of the different acts. If the state can sell that carbon, if they can, what is the bid proposal for that case? And thinking about that, we created this work group of different prosecutors to help the different some of us will be right and some of us will be wrong. So we must have the same understanding in all different prosecutors in different states so that the states can start to act in this area. And if we have an understanding, we can bring safety to the different decision makers. I have to speak slowly because I'm being translated, right? But in case there's a problem, a legal problem concerning the decision maker, we're going to solve that in this work group with different states. And we're going to preserve the act. We will be able to support the decision maker because assessments in the legal Amazon. We also work with the understanding of different environmental fines, so we can organize the collection of fines and all the punishment concerning the infractors. Many people believe that Brazil doesn't have a legislation on that, or that our legislation is very scattered, but it's not the case. We have different standards, and basically we are talking about the Constitution, the law of public forest, the national policy of climate change. We have the Forest Code that also talks about this issue, and we have the infralegal norms. We have the Decree 10-149, different ordinances speaking about the topic. We have next slide, please. Every time we speak about the federal constitution and environment, we talk about Article 2025, 225, I'm sorry. That is on the balanced environment. Third slide, please. Excellent. So everyone has the right for a balanced environment, and concerning the public power, we have the duty to preserve it for the next generation. So this is the most important article of the legislation, but we sometimes forget of the Article 100. In this capitalist system of free market, it's saying that one of the pillars of the system is to defend the environment. So now we come to this COP to discuss the economic and environmental issue. And and we believe that we cannot talk about the environment without talking about the economy. One won't exist without the other. One of the first legislation we had was the law of public forests, forests that are in territories that belong to the states, to the federal government, to the states, to the municipalities. So we have a law that is regulating the different forests and the credit in different concessions. In Amapá, we have this concession of TW forest, and the state is forbidden to provide this possibility to sell carbon credits. And this is discussed today, and in the future, I'm going to show you that that doesn't prevent us to have public concessions on environmental services. I'm going to advance to get to the important topics, but we also have the National Policy of Climate Change from 2009 that is about the Brazilian market of emissions and introduces carbon credit and uh, also bonds concerning emissions. Forest public forest only, but forest in general, and it defines carbon credit. That is a bond. It's not a debt bond, but it's a law bond on this intangible good. This is a good opportunity to define carbon credit in the Brazilian law. Carbon credit, it's not something tangible. You cannot buy that in a store. It's representing a reduction of emissions. So this entity that is either public or private or public is going to bring to the is going to have this emission, and we're going to provide this idea to the Brazilian law. This is the next slide, right? So we have the decree 10144 from 2019 that establishes this market issue in Brazil. The different possibilities of negotiation and collection of values. And I'm not talking about carbon credit. I'm talking about the payment for environmental services. The state of Amapá was able to be accredited concerning this topic, and we're talking about this first part. The states or the federal government, they provide this environmental service, they diminish greenhouse gases emissions, and they receive for that. And then they can issue a carbon government is going to receive this value, and it's going to split in 60-40%. So the federal government is going to allocate 60% to the states, so 40% will remain with the federal government. And this 60% is divided by the states according to the policies, according to the results of the state as well. So each state is going to have at least 2% of collection. This is the initial step for the federal government, but it's an interesting step because you are going to operate the environmental by the Ministry of Environment, establishing different concepts. Uh, the Ordinance 518 from 2022 is establishing Forest Plus from the Ministry of Environment, and everyone knows that we have this voluntary market division with regulated market as well. We of reduction, and according to the Paris Agreement, each country should negotiate what they are able to reduce compared to the goals. And we establish here the economic criteria for this market. And when we talk about the so what is it? What is this public voluntary market? We understand as prosecutors that there's a recognition that the public power can act in this voluntary market, not only in the regulated market. The idea is that in Brazil, for instance, we have this airline called Go. So you can reduce of your emissions by paying a value, I don't know, 15 reais, 20 reais, and you're going to diminish the emissions of your flight. But if these carbon credits, it's going to go to voluntary markets. Are you able to understand? So what's happening? You're going to get a producer, they're going to have a head plus project, you're going to reduce emissions, and then you're going to be paid for that. So the environment is preserved, and they don't need to come to the United Nations to certify that. They are going to justify that they have their private market, this voluntary market, that is not connected to the regulated market. And according to the ordinance issued by the Ministry of Environment, we are talking about this public market that is not restricted to the companies, but also to states of the legal Amazon. Let's talk ahead about
Tô pulando um pouquinho, pessoal, que eu tô com medo de não chegar no final, mas tem
I'm
muita coisa.
skipping some slides because I'm afraid I'm not going to get to the end. I have a lot of content to go through.
Falamos um pouco de Brasil, né? Nós temos algumas regulamentações nacionais, mas
We are going to talk about Brazil. We have some national regulations, but we also have state regulations besides Acre. Amazonas was the first state to have a law on environmental services. It's a law from 2017 when Bolsa Família was created. So it creates the forest fund, thinking about those families that are close to the forest so that they don't deforest the forests. We also have the state of Amapá in the process of regulation. This law is in the we have a decree from the state of Maranhão that already states the policy of Red Plus for the state of Maranhão. We also have Pará that has a state policy on climate change, and we have If I'm not mistaken, this is from Pará as well, that has a state decree on the state plan of Amazon. These examples of legislations are just to show you that our example was not to explain in detail each one of those legislations. The idea was just to show you that Brazil already has a legal support so that Brazil can operate in these cases. I would just like to show you how the Brazilian Federation works in case of constitutional competences. We were with a person from South Africa yesterday, and we were trying to explain to her. Our secretary said that they were a state secretary, and it was very difficult to explain to the immigration agents here in Egypt how the Brazilian state worked. So here you can see the division of our states, the flag of each state in our country, and the question that we're going to answer here now is, so to what extent the states can a tangible example to you is that our federation is divided in the União, which is the federal government, our states, and the municipalities. The first thing is, lots of people think that União is a superior body and we are an inferior body, and this is not true. There is a division of competences between the União, the federal government, and the states. There are matters that the Constitution poses that are exclusive from the federal government, and other matters are exclusive for the states. The federal government is not going to verify, for example, a traffic in a municipal matter. For example, let's think of President Bolsonaro. We think that Bolsonaro is the head of the states, but they are different areas, they are different competences. Constitution has different competences. For example, one competence is to formulate laws, and another competence is to enforce those laws. The competence to formulate laws is called the concurrent competence. This competence to formulate laws pertains to the laws can legislate on forests, fishing, the environmental laws. I was asking a question, for example, forest in Amapá starts catching fire. Do I have to ask for the authorization of the federal government to put out that fire? No, because we have a state competence. And the municipalities as well can protect the environment. They can fight pollution and preserve the fauna and the flora. So the states already have this competence. We have our state bodies that already take care of that and without having to ask for anyone's authorization. You can notice here that issue and the carbon and the voluntary market, they already fit in those descriptions. José Humberto is a prosecutor of the state of Tocantins, and I'm going to ask him to mention what has Tocantins done in these competences. So if there is no hierarchy, the states can formulate the laws on this and enforce those laws and sell carbon credits. And we say that there has to be an approval from the federal government, but this approval of the federal government will depend on two different moments. Until very recently, the buyer or donor would require something from the federal government, the letter. Why would I need this letter? It was because the donor or the buyer wanted this letter. So it depends on the rules of the buyers or the donors. So if a donor wants to go to Amapá and donates R$500,000 to preserve the forests, and they say, I want the federal government to agree with that, I will need this approval from the federal government. That is the only hypothesis when the states are going to need where the states are going to need federal approval is in the regulated market. This market of the Paris Agreement. I'd like to exemplify this by talking about the NDCs in Brazil. We have several members at COP that are not participating in the assembly. The one that represents Brazil among the national bodies is the federal government. If the states unite and say that they don't agree with the NDC, if we think that the goals should be bolder, can we come here to the United Nations and it's not in the legal sphere, this is in the political, social sphere. We're going to need the federal government's approval. If someone goes to Amapá and says, for example, Norway goes to Amapá and says, I want to buy your carbon credits, but these carbon credits should be accounted for in my NDC in Norway. They can do this as long as the federal government agrees. And why is that? If the federal government does not agree, let's take a practical example. If Brazil does not comply with our federal NDC, can we sell the carbon credits to Norway? No, because we can only sell what is left. No, we cannot do that because we don't know if this is Brazil's credits. Geographically, if we think about the state of Amapá, we are generating the credit, but what if all the other states are negative? This is not going to work. So for the purposes of regulated market and the Brazilian NDC, I need the federal government. So this has to be coordinated by the federal government. I'm going to pass the floor to José so that he can explain to you what the market of Tocantins did and why the state of Tocantins did not violate the rules of the Brazilian entity when they created that bidding notice. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is José Humberto. I am a partnership that takes care of all of the statization programs in the state. I would like to greet the Prosecutor General of Amapá, and I think it's a huge reason of pride for the prosecutor's offices to have a space like this. In Tocantins, we understand that the difficulty in commercializing the credits has to do with the stages. One of the stages is the commercial part, which is the selling of the asset itself. And that is a later stage that needs a certification and a registration. And we have a previous stage, which is the stage of the program of paying for the results of or the structuring of the national program for this certification or these risks. For our stock in Tocantins, we will spend 18 to 20 million only to have this international certification. So we wanted to search for mechanisms to do this privately. At COP23 that happened in Poland, one of Brazil's objectives were developing mechanisms that would reduce the emissions and streamline the future commercialization of the credits. So what Tocantins did at the time was developing a mechanism that would facilitate and enable these two stages. Yesterday, I was talking to Wellington and I was saying what we did was we have a mixed society economy for over 20 years, and we have been preparing for this since 2019. Our social object predicts this, and the legislation predicts this. And one of the objectives of this SSA is the streamlining and commercialization of credits of carbon and credits from the emission of greenhouse gases. And this year, we opened a business opportunity. Most of the people here in the public sector may think, oh, the state already works on company, and at the end, only Mercuria was enabled. The object of this business opportunity was the structuring, streamlining, and the funding of the National Red program for the state. Now we are not commercializing any credit. That is why we don't have voluntary nor regulated market. So the private partner has a specific society proposal. Through Tocantins Parcerias, the selected company and the state of Tocantins will have a new society with the shares, and the private company will pay for all the costs of certification and registration of Tocantins' credits. And at the end of the process, until 2032, when the credits are certified and registered, the company must be reimbursed by what they spent now. And the advantage is the preference rights. When there is the commercialization of this carbon, the company will have preference in purchasing those credits. Between 2016 to 2032, 2016 was the registration in the Ministry of Environment until 2032 to give the company a market viability and enable the selling to be in the same pace as the market and or not a direct credit or total sales of the credit. Why didn't we then choose another model or a direct sale or other mechanisms like concession? Because that would be a lot fairer. Maybe this conclusion would be the most important part of this presentation. Since 2019, I've been working in this area, in the state of Amapá. It has been 8 years. Maybe this is the most important part because the theory is very different and very distant from the concrete basis on what is possible to carry out. It depends a lot on the buyer or the donor. Actually, this is the federal government's goal. When these goals are presented at the UN or in other bodies, it takes away our possibility of working with the federal government. And this makes the states crystallized. And we from the states start working on the possibility or the only way that we can to give this possibility to the governors that are connected to the forests and that can bring resources to our riverside communities that are taking care of this forest. So we start working on studying the other alternatives. And this is the role of the prosecutors of Amazônia Legal. We can work on this among us so that we don't have to depend on the federal government because they have established this goal without listening to us. And we are here every day. We are here looking at the forest growing. When I joined in 2019, those who have rights of obtaining international resources were the one that took down the forests. What about the states that didn't take down the forests? We had to create mechanisms to keep our forests up and also gain resources from that. Those who used to deforest and who want to keep their forests up, they have the risk to be arrested.
Nosso trabalho junto.
It's important that you understand our work with the legal Amazon, with the consortium, to bring these possibilities. And the international entities will see that because we are creating a public company to do that. And this is the next step because we have this questioning even at the scope. How is it going to work? Will we be able to deal directly with you, or is it something which is not tangible? So we must provide answers. So this is the best part of the presentation. As I said in the beginning, if you're going to treat differently, and a single state or only the federal government deciding without listening to us, we will go on without getting benefit for the society, especially for those who need the most. Thank you. So next slide, please. I still have 10 minutes, right? So the forum was created in June this year, and now in December we are going uh, approve the different statutory rules, and we were able to discuss these different controversial topics. And we as lawyers, we deal with this kind of turmoil, with this kind of controversy. That this is our job, and our friends were talking about that. We have partnerships with Tocantins, with the state of Tocantins through Tocantins Parcerias, which is this entity. So we were able to find three ways for the states to negotiate carbon credits in the future, because this is about the future, because the state hasn't done any of these negotiations so far. The first one is that Tocantins is using the most clear option, that is opening this society of mixed economy, this company of mixed economy, to negotiate carbon credits. So why should I create this society, this company? Because you've mentioned law 13303. So in Brazil, if I go to this Petrobras gas station, do I need to be part of a bid to buy the gasoline? No, but it's a state-owned company, right? So how can I buy that directly? Because the law is saying that when uh, you're dealing with the social object of this company, you don't need a bid. So Petrobras has different bids to hire a company or to get services, but not to sell gasoline. That's why we created Tocantins Parcerias. So since it's part of the social object of Tocantins Parcerias, we don't need this kind of bid. We could participate in this international auction to see who is going to pay more for that asset. So this is the best option. But we also have a second option, that is the state selling directly this carbon credit. But what's the problem with that? We have the bid law. And nobody's going to operate that with this bidding law, because you cannot have this kind of bid, because the market is very dynamic. The price fluctuates a lot. So we won't be able to use public bid for the sale. But why is the second hypothesis interesting? In the first legislation, when we defined the carbon credit, the legislation defined that as a law bond, a bond of or a bond of right. But so there's a possibility not to have the bid when you're selling bonds. The law 8666 and the new bidding law doesn't require bids when you're selling bonds. And if it's a bond, you can sell. But this is a hypothesis that we are studying. And if this is confirmed, we won't need to have this indirect administration. The state of Tocantins could sell. And we have a third option as well. This third option, I confess that when I started studying, I was very resistant. Maybe you find it difficult as well. But we have a qualified audience, so maybe you won't resist that much. But today, I believe this is part of our future. That is the public concession. We have this old law, 8987, that provides that when the state is providing public service, it can delegate to the private initiative for building highways and also for having forest concessions. So what's happening? TW is going to remove this selected piece of wood from the forest, and this wood will be sold. And it's going to pay to the state of Amapá the value that they received with the sale. And what's the good part? I only give the concession and I don't care about the structure of the company. TW is going to buy the machinery, hire the personnel. They're going to do everything they want, but I'm going to receive for that. But I won't receive so much. I will receive less than if I were selling directly. But we cannot mix this concession with the forest concession. The law on public forestry says that you are forbidden to sell carbon credits in the forest concessions. That means I cannot have a forest concession in Brazil today, but I believe that we are going to change this legislation soon. But today in Brazil, we cannot have this concession, and the winner of the bid, the concessionaire, cannot sell the carbon credit. But they don't tell me about this concession on environmental service, about carbon credit. There's this slight difference. We have this difference between ecosystem services, environmental services, and carbon credits. What is ecosystem services? What the nature is doing, regenerating itself. Environmental services is human intervention. Everything we are talking about is here, environmental services. If I control the deforestation, that's an environmental services that is going to generate ecosystem services, generating carbon reduction in the atmosphere, because the tree is doing that. But who replanted that was the man. It's an environmental service. And we are going to negotiating the environmental service. And carbon credit is a representation of that. If it's an environmental service, I can have a concession here. I can concede this area for a private company, and I'm going to charge this amount for tons of carbon, for instance, and they're going to negotiate on behalf of the state. Do you understand what I mean? This is an option that must be studied, and that's what we're doing in the state of Tocantins. There's a legal possibility here. Just to make it clear, this possibility is impossible according to the law today. But we have the participation of the different states so that we can remove from the law this line saying that we cannot have a concession of carbon. There's this work because that could be the future. But for that, we are going to regulate that. We need to regulate that. That's something that will need work, joint work, federal work. But there's another detail. This is forbidden when it's conjuncted with this forest concession. But we could think about another option that is not the forest concession. So we could consider that. You wouldn't have the concession of the public credit. You are going to concede that area for this service plan for that area. You cannot concede the forest, but you can generate the carbon credit without managing the forest. You could do that because it's not within the law of public forest. The public forest is a concession for selling wood. But if I can have a hedge, a red plan, I can see that. If there's a deforested area and the company is saying, I'm going to start planting again and I'm going to concede the credits, I don't see that being forbidden. It's only the forest concession that is forbidden. not for reforestation. And the conservation unit is such is that you can have a concession if you comply to the rules of concession. So each unit has its own rule. Okay? Any other question? I had another controversy, but I'm going to only mention that. This is an interesting point because the legislation forbids. I understand you can, but it's a discussion that depends on the regulation. So translating, we should regulate. If you don't have this regulation, the different states won't be able to work with that. Just to add, because we're talking about a public territory, we should also differentiate the concession of the Brazilian concession according to this legislation 8987 and the right to use this territory. It's a concession of this specific public service because it's the concession of use. We're going to have a different authorization from the legislation, the local legislation. 2 more minutes, please. The constitutions and the laws, when we talk about conceding an area, we must have the authorization of the state legislation, the legislature. But here we are talking about an environmental service. We have the rights of building roads, for instance, and this is similar to this model that we are trying to build. And the last point, I'm only going to mention because we won't have time. I said I well, we have the compatibility of the voluntary market with the regulated market. Nothing prevents me from having this compatibilization. If the Go Airlines wants to sell credits, I can make that compatible with the regulated market. We have the Paris Agreement that needs this provision of the foreseen hypothesis and requires regulation and operation of the different UNFCCC structures and the discount of NDCs. And we have the voluntary market that is completely different. If you play in Brazil, for instance, if someone scores a goal in this Brazilian championship, will it be valid for the World Cup? No, we're talking about different championships. So if a company sold for the state of Amapá, it won't be not necessarily recognized by Brazil. If you can buy that from Go Airlines, you're going to feel good about the environment. And we're talking about an ethical discussion. It's not a legal discussion. So we have different leagues. The Brazilian Championship is different from the World Cup. Regardless of your reflection, we have this reflection from the Bible. Because God didn't provide us with this coward spirit, but the spirit of power, love, and balance. If we wait too much, we are going to be at COP 500 and the planet will be over. We have to start working even if we are afraid. The state of Acre in 2012 was able to sell credits, starting working, and everything worked. At the time, we had no regulation, and Acre was able to lead the way. And from that, we had the California law, GCF, and that came from the courage of a group of people. And I know that we have very brave people here. We are at the Amazon hub. So we shouldn't wait for this law that is saying exactly what we should do. We should observe different legal issues and we should go on. We should advance. Otherwise, we will discuss forever. So I'll leave here this reflection. Thank you so much. I'm sad that I couldn't delve deeper in other topics, but let's work together to advance with the Congress, with the judiciary, with the public prosecution. Together, we will be able to solve that. Thank you so much. They belong to the prosecutors. They are real pictures taken by a photographer from Amapá. She's the wife of a prosecutor, and she authorized us to put this on. All the pictures were from the state of Amapá, and her name is Gabriela. I'd like to thank her for giving us the image copyright. I'd like to thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.